Well, good evening, Milestone. I hope that you're having a great day. Wednesday night, April the 14th, 2021. Great morning, great day early on, and then it started to cloud over and had a little bit of rain tonight. It's going to rain all day tomorrow. I'm not sure why I give you the weather forecast every Wednesday, but hey, it's good to talk about the weather. Hope that you're doing well. And I want to encourage you with some words tonight from God's Word and give you really a big brain teaser, if you will. You'll need a thinking cap for this. But the encouragement is that God has great plans for us. And sometimes it's hard to see that. Sometimes it's hard to understand that. But God has great plans for us. God has great plans to help us to grow, to mature, to help us to prosper in the way that He sees fit. Sees best for us. And so I want to kind of start out by that, and then I want to kind of push away from that thought a little bit with this question. Can God's plans ever get messed up? Can God's plans ever get messed up? I mean, think about it. If God is preparing a spouse for you, if you're a teenager or a young person that's looking to get married at some point in time, and you're praying for your spouse, and you're saying, God, give me this spouse, and you're trying to decide, which college do I go to? Can I mess up God's plan for the future spouse? Maybe He's preparing a spouse in this town where I'm going to be going to college, or can I mess up God's plan? Or maybe it's that you blew it. You made a mistake. And you say, maybe in my mistake I messed up God's plan. Where God was going to do this, God had this in mind, but now because I messed up, because I did this wrong, and I kind of changed the whole course of my life, I messed up God's plan. Can I mess up God's plan is the question. Now, I don't know that I can fully answer that, but I can give you some thoughts here that will kind of guide you in this process. And really, this is the whole conversation around God's sovereignty and man's free will. Do we have free will or not? And how does this all work out? And listen, this is way bigger than my mind can conceive, but I want to give you some thoughts to maybe guide you in it. Because I find in this tremendous encouragement that I cannot mess up God's plan. But God's plan is probably different than what I anticipated. So I want to go back, and I want to talk about one of my favorite texts in Scripture. And it's going back to the Old Testament, and it really talks about this one person where you see God's hand was on this person and said, here's my plans for you. And then this person goes through this weird phase of life for the next 12, 13, 14 years where things just get all kinds of weird and messed up, and you just look and say, what happened with God's plan? This is going back to Genesis chapter 37. Genesis 37, I'm going to give you a huge overview of the whole text here, but it starts in Genesis 37 and goes through the end of the book. And I talked to a couple people on Sunday about this because my message was all about this, where the disciples had a plan that they prayed about and they acted on, but they didn't realize that sometimes just because you pray doesn't mean you should proceed. And I talked about that on Sunday. And they found out later on, just months later, that God had a plan that was far greater than the plans they came up with. So you have to listen back on Sunday's message, or maybe you were here or you heard that or saw it, and I'm just reminding you for that. Well, in Genesis chapter 37, we pick up this whole narrative about this little kid, this guy is 17 years old, Joseph. Joseph is born, his father is Jacob, and there's several other siblings for Joseph, and so here Joseph finds himself in a very interesting situation where God gives him a dream, gives him a vision of what the future looks like, and says, here's my plans for you, Joseph. And the plan looks like this. Here's the dream. It's that his brothers are going to bow down to him at one point in time. So what we see is that God is with Joseph. Joseph wants to be with God. And so there's this great communion or relationship that they already have there at the age of 17. Well, Joseph spills the beans to his brothers. His brothers didn't really care for him that much anyway. And his brothers devised this plan to get rid of Joseph for good. And so first they want to kill him. Then they realize that's not the best of plans. We don't want the blood on our hands. So let's just leave him in this well, let him rot and die. We don't really want that. And his one brother says, hey, listen, I see this caravan going around here. Why don't we sell him? Let's make some money off of Joseph. He's a great young man, really strong. Let's sell him so we can make some money, and we'll sell him into a slavery position that we will never see him again, because people don't survive as slaves for very long. They have a couple of years, and they're not fed very well. They're not treated well, and eventually they just die. And so that was what they expected. They go and they sell him into slavery. And Joseph, at that time, goes and then is traded into this other place and becomes Potiphar, who's kind of like the chief of police or mayor or whatever, kind of political position. And he becomes the slave or the servant for Potiphar. Now, what's interesting is, remember, God's plan. God's plan is, Joseph, I have this in mind for you. That didn't happen in the beginning. The last time he remembers seeing his brothers is, guess what? They're trying to kill you. Wouldn't that make you question God? Wouldn't that make you a little bit suspicious, like, what was that dream all about? Maybe I just ate some funny pizza. Maybe something just didn't agree with me. I don't know what was going on. But honestly, if we're sitting there and we say, hey, just like I reminded you in the beginning of our talk, God has great plans for you. Maybe you're sitting and you're like, you know what? This plan is not so great. My life is pretty miserable, as a matter of fact. And so here's Joseph. He sold as a slave by his brothers. And then kind of pushed into this other place, and he's in Potiphar's house. And he gets some responsibility because he does a great job. But besides that, here's what we find in Genesis chapter 39. If I can turn the page here. In Genesis chapter 39, we see something fascinating in that it says this in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. Why? Because God was with him. God was with him. God was with Joseph while his brothers sinned against him. So did his brothers actually have a choice in the sin they did against Joseph? Is one of the questions I have. Man's free will, God's sovereignty. How does this mix here? Because here's his brothers doing a sinful thing against Joseph. But it would seem that God was orchestrating a plan. It would seem that in the middle of this, and there would be all kinds of bitterness issues and anger issues and all kinds of pain that Joseph would have to deal with, emotionally. But in the middle of this, God's going, here's my plan. It's working out. It's going the way I intended. And Joseph is finding himself in Potiphar's house, and God says, Lord was with Joseph. You go down through this and you find Potiphar's wife. She makes the story up about him, and that's a whole other story to read. And he ends up then being put in jail. He could have been put to death, and the crime that she accused him of would have had him put to death. But Potiphar decided not to. Put him in jail for him to rot away. Basically, let's just forget about Joseph. He's going to be dead in a while. But it says this in verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So God is giving him steadfast love. How do you receive steadfast love from God while in prison is the question. Big, huge statements. He's the victim of being lied about. He's a victim of being imprisoned on false accusation. He's the victim of being put in as a slave when he was the favorite son. So you got all these victim things going on, but God says, I love you. And he's showing his steadfast love and wanting to be with him. During those times where we can be the victim of something huge and horrendous, and this really is. God could still be with us. It could still be part of God's plan even. It's hard for me to put this all together in my mind. But here he says, he showed him steadfast love. You go down further and you find that Joseph interprets dreams. Everybody forgets about Joseph, and that's what we find. It's, hey, let's get rid of him, and so we forget about him, and he interprets dreams, and they forget about him again, and you go down through further, and you see in his life, you get to the end of it, and there's just, I'm almost out of time here for you tonight. But you see Joseph's life. And here's my whole point. His life continues to say, statement after statement of the same thing. And the Lord was with Joseph. And the Lord was with Joseph. He showed him grace. He showed him steadfast love. Listen, at the end of it, Joseph says to his brothers, while his brothers were saying, please don't kill us, he says, guys, what you did that was wrong, God had a plan. While they were fulfilling the plan that God had in the beginning, your brothers one day will bow down. And while they were bowing down to him, saying, please don't kill us, and Joseph had no intention of killing them, he says, guys, really, this plan started with that dream. And now I'm over here watching that plan come right out. And it's, listen, you don't understand. God put me in this place. It's a good thing. And here's my encouragement. My encouragement is, in the middle of the week, I'm not sure how your week is going. Maybe you're in the middle of a really rough week, or just a challenging time, or maybe you know somebody's going through a challenging time, and you say, hey, listen, how does God work all this out for good, and how is this going to work? And I don't understand, and maybe God's not present, maybe he's not real, and I get it. I think Joseph would say, yeah, there's times where I was in jail just saying, God, you here? But years later, Joseph could look back and say, oh, wow, God had a plan that was bigger than I could even orchestrate. So church, maybe God has a bigger plan in your life that's way bigger than you could orchestrate, way bigger than you can conceptualize. And God's like, oh, no, I got this. And yeah, you're going through a hard time, but I know. And I need you to go through that because I'm training you for this over here. And I need to use you in a greater way than you even think that you should be used. For God's glory, for his purpose, for his kingdom. And so, church, I don't know where you're at, and I hope this finds just a deep part of your heart where it encourages you and helps you just to draw near to God. And maybe tonight after we're done here, maybe you just stop and say, Lord, thank you for what you're taking me through today. Thank you for what you're taking me through this year. Thank you for how you're working out your plan. I don't know how you're going to do it, but you're going to work it out. And so, God, thank you, and help me to keep trusting in you. Hey, church, thanks for joining me tonight. Appreciate you, and hope they have a great rest of the week. Read through this text, if you will, and just dive into it and enjoy the life of Joseph and how God worked out his plan in an amazing way. Have a great day. See you.